I want to welcome everybody back to the second and last of our presentations for today. I'd like to ask if you can all join me in a word of prayer. Holy God, we thank you that we have the privilege of being able to come together to reason with one another and especially to reason with you. We thank you for the privilege that you give to us so that we might become close and have a clearer understanding of who you are, how you think, so that we can understand ourselves better. In Jesus' name, Amen. In this morning's class, I read a passage from the Spirit of Prophecy that spoke about the seriousness of marriage. I read that passage because I wanted people to know that I personally take marriage seriously, and despite what people may think, I don't view it in a frivolous or light manner. The second part of the study, or the majority of it, was to help us to understand, get a clearer understanding that when we consider any subject, and we're talking about marriage in this case, that we have to try to view things in a framework or in a model. If we just go to our favorite passages of inspiration or try to use our own logic and arguments, we're prone to make mistakes. I then went to explain the development of these prophetic models that we have in the movement. All based upon two models: lines of progression and dispensational views. We spoke about three models: 7 churches, lines of failure and success, and what we're currently examining. When I mean we and when I mean currently, I don't mean me particularly. I'm suggesting in the dispensation, in the time period in which we're living, examining the truth, whether you call them waymarks or world events, they need to be understood in a framework, and the one that you should be using now, the one that we will be using collectively, is one called the Old and New Covenant. And the book of Hebrews is a good example of that. How to compare and contrast the two. So that's what we spoke about this morning. So I want to turn back to the subject of marriage, and I believe Joanna has a question.
So I would like you come back to topics that you addressed last Sabbath in UK. You talk about the divorce without for any reason. The divorce for any reason. What does it mean? So I will give you an example. Joanna, rapproche le micro, s'il te plaît. So my husband put on a lot of weight, and I want a divorce. So how do you see this example based upon what you introduced last week?
We've been speaking about the subject of divorce and connected to that remarriage for quite some time now. We've approached the subject both prophetically and I'll just call it morally. So we're going to symbolize this relationship and try to understand what it means in a prophetic sense. We're also going to look at the subject from the perspective of real life human relationships. And we should be able to jump back and forth and get the same answers. We all know that once people marry, that marriage comes to an end when people die or when they commit adultery, which means that they have some kind of sexual intimacy with another person. I've explained the reasons why sex is the target to dissolve or to end a marriage as opposed to some other issue. We all know that Elder Test introduced in a formal way the subject of equality, and then she went from that idea to making the great test the subject of equality. We might call it the golden rule. When you can see that, I and I think other people have looked or re examined the early Advent history and shown that A.T. Jones in the 1880s tackled the great test over the same issue, which was equality or human rights. So that gives us the license, the opportunity, if you like, the confirmation, of changing what the great test is from what Ellen White teaches to what we currently believe. We've used all we've used all of that information to develop prophetic models, and at a personal or moral level, we have now acknowledged that it's acceptable, and it tends to be mostly women, that if abuse occurs in a relationship, that the partner, normally the woman, can leave or divorce. But we haven't developed that. We've just had, I would say, an understanding of its truthfulness, and we've left the subject for the last several years. So I wanted to revisit the subject to see if we can move forward. Because the subject isn't just about divorce, it's also about remarriage. So, in some previous classes, I brought up the subject, and instead of tackling abuse as a reason for divorce, I said let's consider the issue at a broader level. So we know that we have divorce. Death, that's obvious. We don't normally discuss that. Adultery. And I think most of us understand what that is. Then we began looking at abuse, but we didn't finish that. And now I've introduced a new topic which would cover abuse and additional areas of concern. So I've called that for any reason. And when I start speaking in those terms, people have become concerned or nervous that I'm making a mockery or trivializing marriage. And what about those vows or those commitments that we made on the day of the ceremony, on the day of marriage? So people have been fearful of exploring this or talking about it because they see this as taking this sacred institution and just throwing it into the dust. So what people want me to do is change the word any to something else. And I guess the obvious one would be this. For a good reason. So I guess most of us have moved forward in our emotional response to marriage. So we've gone way past adultery now, and we'll say maybe there's another good reason. And the reason why I feel we can't go down that path is because something that's good is not definable. Because I don't know what good is. And I'm suggesting that you wouldn't know what good is. And what you think will strengthen the laws surrounding marriage will end up trivializing those laws if you go down the path of defining what good is. You'll fall into the trap that all denominations have fallen into. The Jews were the architects of this foolishness. The Bible says, do not work on Sabbath. And they said, what does work mean? How do we define that? And they ended up getting to a place where they would say a certain amount of steps is work. And when they get to that place, then they look for ways to circumvent that law. So for those of us who are concerned or worried by the word any, you should be more concerned about the word good. Because that really would trivialize the subject. All good? So I'm assuming everybody's okay with divorce because of abuse. Is anybody not okay with that? That they would block a woman from leaving her husband if he abused her. That you would take the position that Adventists and other conservative denominations take, that you should forgive, forget, essentially turn the other cheek. So I assume nobody will hold on to that idea any longer. In our movement, I mean. So if that's the case, then I would ask you, what is abuse? How do you define what abuse is? Because as soon as you begin to start trying to define levels of abuse, I think you'll begin to get into problems. So I don't know if someone wants to volunteer. Anybody? So I'll offer one. And it will begin with the word any, which shouldn't surprise you, because that's the word I'm using right above. The rest of it's easy to finish off. I'll offer something. There's lots of alternatives. Any bad behavior. Is anybody not okay with that definition of abuse? Anything that is bad is abusive. Because if it's not, that means bad things become good things. We could go and check and get the opposite of abuse. Muriel.
I'm a little bit troubled because beforehand you said we don't know what good means. You don't know, and me either, neither. So if I compare with bad, it's the same. So what is good for you is not, what is bad for you is not bad for me. Do you see my point?
That's why I said any. Keep the mic if you want. Let's go with the word abuse. What would you say abuse is? Your dictionary definition, yours, or your working model for it. I want it simple so I can write it down. You can give a longer one first, but then I want a short one so people.
Do not
Respect.
respect the individual
Okay.
in his or integrality.
Can I just put disrespect? Anybody object to that? Abuse is disrespect. Could I say mistreatment? When you mistreat somebody or you disrespect them, those are broad definitions of abuse. So if we can agree with that, I don't normally do this if I ask for the opposite, but I will just now. In English, disrespect is two words. It has a preface. So the opposite would be respect. Mistreat, the preface miss means don't or bad. So that would be bad treatment. So the opposite would be just treatment, or you'd have to put good treatment. So abuse is any kind of behavior, because you didn't like me using the word bad because it's the opposite of good, and you saw that was a mistake. So if I reframe it this way, abuse is any form of disrespect, any form of mistreatment, any of it. Are we okay with that? So if that's the definition of abuse that we have, and we're all in agreement that it's anything, does that mean a woman can leave her husband for any form of abuse? And would you say to that woman, don't be silly, that's not abuse? Who would say that to a woman? She says he comes home every day and he's rude and disrespectful, takes care of the children, cuts the grass, pays the bill, does everything, but doesn't respect me. And you'll say, did he hit you? Did he swear at you? Did he call you names? And you'll say, no, but I don't feel he respects me. Who would say, that's not abuse? This is the problem where you will end up if you start trying to define abuse for another person. And if you can see that with the subject of abuse, you could see that with any subject. Is it abusive if your husband covers all the bills, keeps everything running okay, but has a gambling problem or a dependency problem on alcohol, and you find that disruptful or damaging to your family's welfare, you've asked him to stop and I won't say he can't, I'm just saying he doesn't. Whatever the reason is, he doesn't stop. You might not define that as abuse, but you might say, I can't live this way, and it would be covered under the any. Most people in the past, maybe some of us even now, would say, why are you complaining for? You got all these good things, do a list of all the good and compare that to the bad. And if the good outweighs the bad, stay. It might work for one person, but it wouldn't work for another. So this is why I'm saying the word any has to be put there. Because the decision has to be the person who's suffering. So the example that was given was about being overweight. So we might think that's a very trivial reason. Others might not think it's trivial. Because if we say 10 kilograms, let's shift it to 100 kilograms. Your husband's put on 100 kilograms, which happens. And now your husband would perhaps technically be considered disabled. And now you say, this is not the life I signed up for. He's not abusing me, but he keeps on eating. He has an eating disorder. And I never signed up for that. So it might seem trivial at 10 kilograms for one person, but when we start looking at is it 10 or 15 or 100, I hope you can see where the problems rise. That's why the only safe way to approach this is to say any. Your question?
I found a definition for abuse. So abuse it's included all behavior with a tendency to scare, to to frighten, to intimidate. Okay, manipulate, hurt, humiliated. Okay, so to put guilt upon some people. So in this word abuse, you can find a lot of words to explain it. So it's not about only a meaning, a definition, but a several definition.
What you've just have you finished? What you just said, is that different to what's on the board? Any type of misbehavior.
I confirm.
Excellent. Yes. So we had a nice definition just here that confirmed that it's any type of mistreatment or misbehavior. I want to add, it's not my place to tell someone to divorce if your husband is rude to you or doesn't speak to you. You have to make that decision. You have to calculate what you are prepared to accept or not accept. But what I want us all to see that it is abusive. But there is some type of relationship behavior that we might find difficult to define as abuse. And that's why there's this other reason, non abusive reasons. And in most real life issues, relationship problems, I'll call it other reasons, they generally gravitate to two issues: money and children. It's not exclusively these, but they tend to gravitate on these two uh, areas. And a lot of them wouldn't be considered abuse. Someone had a question here? Right?
My question is the topic, is it why people divorced, or the divorce is allowed if? Because now I'm taking all the example we have. Of course, I will not like, I will dislike that my husband takes 100 kilo or he drinks. So this behavior destroy our family. So as a human being, a woman, of course, I would like to divorce him. But I'm 100% sure that is not God's will. So I would like to have some light on that point.
I don't know if I can offer light. You said, as a human being, you would believe that divorce is an appropriate action to take. Appropriate. Acceptable. Did I understand that bit correct? Then you said, I'll add some words. Now I'm going to look at this from God's perspective. And you use the percentage. So I want to say it this way. As a human being, you're 100% sure to divorce, but God would say 100% don't divorce. And you seem to be sure that you knew what God thought. And I find that interesting, that how do you know what God thinks?
I made a mistake in my thinking. I think if we are facing this kind of issue in our couple, the decision to take is not to divorce, but to ask for help. I think that divorce it's an easy way to deal with. So to get married, it's a choice we did. And without the difficulty, we can overcome with God's help.
I don't know how many people in this room are divorced, and I don't want to challenge your experience, but I would offer just a suggestion that I don't think divorce is an easy option. I think people who decide to divorce do so after very careful consideration, and I don't think the decision comes lightly. And I'm not suggesting that people just should get divorced at the slightest provocation. What we're addressing is the right to do so as a human being, and legally, which means the state or the government says we're allowed to. And I'm saying that we need to explore how many kingdoms we're in. So we could argue that we're in two kingdoms. So we know what this earthly kingdom says, and what we need to explore is what God's kingdom says we're allowed to do. I guess, unlike you, I'm not 100% sure of what God's position would be. I don't know how many of you know personally women who have been abused. I'm not an expert on the subject, but because of my role, I do know quite a few. And I personally, I never recommend what they should do. But if they came to me and they said they had been raped by their husband or harmed in some way, whether it's physical or emotional, I would never ever tell them to stay in the marriage and try to work it out. Because to me, that is dangerous for the woman to do that. For me to tell her to change her perspective, her reality of what's happening. Because I don't think, I'll leave it there. I don't want to talk on God's behalf what I think God would do or wouldn't do. But but I don't think I'm as persuaded about what God thinks as perhaps you are. So before I take the next question, did I answer your question or did I address at least portions of it?
We will say yes.
Sorry?
We
Yes.
will say yes.
Okay. What I don't want to do is I don't want to give extreme examples to you because I'll force you to say yes. Your sister is in a broken marriage and she comes to you with a broken nose and a cut lip. And she says this is the fifth time this has happened. I'm not sure that you would say it's God's will that you don't divorce. That's why I don't want to give these extreme examples because they're too emotive. You speak.
I'm a rebellious woman. So is my neighbor has been beaten by her husband? I will tell her to divorce him and I will beat him myself. Any reason? Okay. So I don't. What bothers me is not the abuse, things, but it's any reason, divorce for any reason. So I really understood what you just said, but what troubled me is any reason.
What do you mean you're a rebellious person? Where was the rebellion in any of what you just said?
Okay, rebellious is I'm contradicting myself a little bit because I said I'm not. I don't want to divorce, c'est ça, je vais pas divorcer. I said that God is not okay for divorce, but I will be the first one who divorce.
Because your humanity tells you how God responds and thinks. That's not rebellion, it's common sense what you're saying. And the second bit is righteous indignation. You'll find what your response is actually in alignment with God's will. At least with God's character. I'll stop there. Shemaine.
So when you talk about a divorce for any reason, you are not addressing the topic of the contract with the two parties, or that marriage is a sacred institution created by God. Why?
This morning, we read from 10 manuscripts, Manuscript Releases, Volume 10. Just want to read something from there. I don't know if you have it in front of you, Shemaine. Yes? Okay, you tell me. What? Do you want me to do it?
We agree that I ask the question, but you don't ask me back question. Remember our
Okay.
deal.
I'll read this and I'll answer my own question.
Or ask to another person.
Ellen White said, this is paragraph 1 towards the end. If you look on your left, it's the 5th line from the bottom. It says the form. I know it's in English. The form of words spoken over the two who take the marriage vow. I'll read it again. The form of words spoken over the two who take the marriage vow. To me, that sounds like contract. The contract that Shemaine mentioned, that's what it is. So I don't normally do this, or I try to avoid it. Proof texting, or proving my point with inspiration. But because that's the framework in which we're working in, I'll do that now. What does it say? And the second part of that sentence, the end bit, it says this contract, the form of words, which is the contract, Ellen White's words, this does not make them one unit. That means the contract that they had on their wedding day at the ceremony does not make them one flesh. And the argument that's being made is that it does. And Ellen White says it doesn't. She says it's the afterlife, the next day and every other day, that's what makes them one flesh. So all I want to say about the contract, why I didn't focus upon this contract, is because when you push Ellen White, even she has to acknowledge, however significant the contract is, and it is significant, it's not the definition of marriage. It's not make or break. You can make the contract and it still doesn't make you one flesh. And to me that means you can give your word, I promise you, health or sickness, rich, poor, bad behavior, good behavior. You can sign it in blood and it still doesn't make you one. I'm not saying don't say the words. What I am suggesting is, and Ellen White I think is suggesting the same, that God acknowledges our humanity. And our humanity makes these contracts that are like signed, like written in stone, not feasible. I'm not trying to suggest they're not serious or that we shouldn't even say something like that. Maybe you might change the words, but the essence is the same. That when you marry somebody, you're not saying, like a car, oh, I'll get this new car for 5 years and then return it and upgrade. I'm not suggesting. I don't know anybody that's suggesting that marriage is like a part-time occupation, or you exchange your partner after a certain amount of time. It's a commitment that you make for life, but it doesn't define your life. That's what I'm suggesting, is that I'm challenging.
What do you mean by define your life?
Okay, so your question, Shemaine?
So
Before you ask your question,
no, it just
did what I just say make sense? No, your question.
okay. What do you mean by do not define our life? And don't forget the second part of the question, that marriage is a sacred institution created by God. Why don't you talk about it?
Okay, so I've got the second one. Oh, it's on my board. I have got that written down. So I'm still on the contract bit, how it defines and defining your life. This is what I have taught recently. I want to take three dispensations. The first one is Muriel. What's the first one? Eden. And Muriel, what's the last one? And we'll just call this the middle. So the Eden at either end, in the scale of things, look like this. Do we agree with that? The middle bit is nearly 6,000 years, and the Eden at the beginning and the Eden at the end are very small time periods. We'll agree with that? At the beginning, it's only one marriage. After that, everything collapses. And at the end, the restoration, the only people who are capable of restoring marriage is this movement. Unless you think someone else is capable of doing that. And when I say we're the only ones that are capable, I don't mean your marriages are all perfect. I'm talking about establishing laws to set marriage on a proper foundation. And we've only been doing this for about 30 to 40 years. And for most of that, we were doing it incorrectly. So I just want to say that. So at the beginning, this Eden model, what kind of marriage is that? I'm going to call it companionship or equality. And you all know the imagery in Genesis. Taken from the rib, next to the heart, not the feet, not the head, all of that. So you would expect, at the end, marriage to be on the same basis. In the middle, what kind of a marriage is this? So when I say what kind of marriage is this is a single line. And this is a story of one kingdom. Which kingdom is that? The kingdoms of this earth or the kingdom of heaven? The kingdom of men or the kingdom of God? Has to be God, isn't it? We don't care about what the world's doing. So this line above, the Eden to Eden pattern, if you want to call it that, this is talking about God's kingdom. Are we okay with that? So when we talk about the middle one, this is not how the world does it, not the kingdoms of this earth, not Babylon or Egypt, which are the two symbols of this world. This is how marriage works in God's kingdom. Does anybody disagree with what I've said on this last bit? So if that's the case, when we're talking about this history, the restoration of marriage, and people are worried because I don't use God's name enough, or I don't talk about sacredness enough, It's a mistake on my part. I want us to all be sure that when I'm speaking about marriage, divorce for any reason, abuse, any type of abuse, this is not talking about marriages in the world. These are about marriages in God's kingdom. This is how God's kingdom operates. And you would expect that the world would follow very similar rules, have very similar laws. So when we talk about sacred institution, I hope I've answered the sacred bit. This is a sacred subject because it's dealing with marriage in God's kingdom. Not Satan's kingdom. Satan's kingdom, they do things quite differently. And I want to suggest that Satan's kingdom is not the kingdoms of this earth. It's for another discussion, but there are subtle differences between the two. And an institution is a rule, a law, we might even call it a contract or an agreement. So this is all very sacred for me. If I've given the impression that it isn't, I apologize. And this is definitely an institution, and it's definitely God's. It's all about God. Which is why I was interested when you were speaking. You said, I know what I think as a human. And you inferred that God had very different views. And in these discussions, the only one I'm concerned about is what God thinks. Not what we think individually. If I'm doing anything wrong or misrepresenting God, then I'm teaching error. So, I want to look at this middle bit in God's kingdom here on earth. Because 1, 2, and 3 are all on earth. And this middle bit, which is taking up most of this line, the marriage framework is not about companionship. I'll call it protection or survival. Protect and survive what? We know what it is not. It's not protecting women. Most people don't care, but it's not protecting men either. It's not the survival of women and their welfare. It's only serving one purpose. It's the protection and survival. I call it the kingdom. And when I say the kingdom, what I mean is the blood. There's life in the blood, we know all about that. And it's the blood of the Jews, the Jewish nation. That's what the bulk of all this middle bit is all about. You go from literal Jews or ancient Israel to spiritual Jews or modern Israel, And all of this is to protect. So this morning, I think it was this morning, I spoke about Ellen White's views on racism. Did we mention that in class? Or not? I did it in maybe in another class, but because I spoke about it privately today. So in another class, I've spoken about the inconsistencies. So when I do that, I make Ellen White look really bad. What's Ellen White's mission when it comes to marriage? What's her job function? It's not to institute Eden, even if she says it is. I'm saying it's not. She has deceived herself, misunderstood something, but that's not her job. She has one job: to protect the bloodline. You would say it this way: to protect Adventism, the movement, the church. That's why she can say segregation, racism, is wrong. But to protect the church, that woman and the man cannot marry. Their welfare, their happiness, their love, their companionship is nothing. It has zero value. And what has all the value is the mission, the church. If you can see it the way I've laid it out, I think it will explain all the idiosyncrasies or the contradictions you see in in her practices. She speaks the words, but doesn't walk the reality of that. She's all talk and no action, if I can say it that way. Talks companionship, but acts protection, because that's what her job is. Once all of that comes to its end, we go through a period of darkness, 126 years of it, and then we come to this generation, Eden 2, restoration. And we have, in this particular arena, have one job function: to do Eden to Eden. We have to re-establish marriage, to put it back on its proper footing, on its level. Which means we don't care. So we don't care about the church, about bloodlines. The only thing we care about is companionship. Because that's what marriage was at the beginning. It was such a serious thing, this companionship thing. However you want to read it, God said, you mess around, I will kill you. In Eden. And when Eve does the very thing that she was not allowed to do, and she's about to be killed, what does Adam do? What does Adam do? He says, let me remind you, God, when you created us, the thing that defined me was my companion. And that's why Adam makes that choice. Kind of like pokes God in the eye and says, killing Eve is incompatible with our creation because we are one. And you can't kill her without killing me. You can't kill me because I haven't done anything wrong. Everyone's in a very difficult situation, all three of them. And the whole universe is now in a problem because of the definition of what marriage is. Now, Ellen White will read the situation differently. They get thrown out the garden, bad people, kill animals. She can have that perspective. I'm not arguing that. But once you have a model of companionship, there are ramifications for that. You can't separate people that easily. And I think there's a beautiful story there. After that, things go really bad. Not between Adam and Eve. There's no indication that their marriage ever went bad after that. But their children is another story. And that's everything in the middle. Just gets worse and worse. And it doesn't get much better even in Ellen White's time. And we're the people, just us, this little group that we call the movement, that have to restore all of this. And the restoration is not, as Ellen White frames it, you live perfectly happy marriages. This is about a sacred institution. And to us, that means we have to get our understanding of law correct. The laws of marriage. And if your private life is collapsing, I'm sorry. If you have to divorce, I'm sorry. But the only protection that you have, that the universe has, is by re-establishing marriage on its proper law, on its proper foundation. And the board tells you what that is. We have to redesign marriage. So it's built upon a companionship model. Not contracts. Not staying in marriage for your children. Or what people think. Or the contract that you made years ago. It's about companionship. Not about protecting property. And that changes things significantly. So I'm saying this is a restoration of marriage that you can separate for any reason. Because a law's been broken. The law of companionship. You break that law, you're free to walk away. And It's not my place. On a real life individual example, I could get involved and give counsel. I'm not saying that. I don't do that. I'm not saying you shouldn't get advice from a professional or from your friend or from your elder. I'm not saying that we shouldn't try to reconcile, but the rules are different. In the middle, if you divorce, things get really ugly because you can't track the line of the family. I don't like using. Does everybody know what the B word is in English? Because I don't want to use it. Yeah? So, that is a real problem in that middle bit because it destroys the bloodline. Now, in our marriage situation, the companion model, it's equally bad, but for very different reasons. Because now this is personal betrayal, as opposed to knowing which child gets the inheritance. So, I've tried to answer the bit about contract. We could discuss more about that, but the contract that we are now signing, I'm not saying you have to get remarried. And I know most of us who are already married got married, I'm going to say, in this middle era. At least the middle mindset. And in the new one, the contract's very different. The contract is we're going to be lifelong friends, not baby making machines, not property making machines. The contract is about friends. And if you're not friends, everybody's got friends. What happens if you fall out with your friend? You walk away and get a different friend. To me, it's not about trivializing marriage, it's about putting it in its new framework. These are marriages in God's kingdom. God's involved, and it's sacred. And when we talk about the institution of marriage, I'm talking about Eden, that version. And my understanding is that that was a companionship marriage, not a contract. If it was contract, if you were Adam, what would you do? You'd exchange the model. I got this thing. It was defective goods. Get rid of that and get me a new one. That's how the middle portion works. That's why men can have multiple wives. Because that's what you have to do to protect. If that was the Eden model, Adam would have just said, kill her and give me a new one. But because it's a companionship one, he knows her death is his death. And therefore, he won't break that marriage, and therefore God can't kill them. And we frame that in a very ugly way, like Adam's selfishness or rejection of God, putting Eve before God. You might see it that way, but what I want to suggest is reframe it and see Adam fulfilling the law of God. The law of marriage, because it's the law of companionship. And I think that's the sacredness of the marriage that I'm talking about. And once someone says, I don't want to be your friend anymore, your companion, you can leave for any reason. The any reason is no longer a companion. I understand it sounds scary. I understand it can even sound heretical. But the only protection that I can offer you is put it into a framework. If the framework is correct, just follow through with the consequences of that and you'll see whether or not it's reasonable or silly. So I had 5 minutes a minute ago, but I don't know if anybody wants to ask a question or make a comment. Yep.
Maybe I didn't understand well. C'est bon? The way you framed Adam's following of Eve, it seems to me that it romanticized Adam's sin. Maybe I understood something incorrectly. Maybe I understood something incorrectly.
Maybe you understood things perfectly clearly. Maybe I'm just a romantic. I know it sounds funny when I said that, but I meant it seriously. If I were to tell you I can prove that God is a romantic, would it sound more reasonable then?
Yes, but not in sin.
You call it sin because you work in a model that identifies it as sin. Just reframe it in the context of love and commitment, and then I think you'd be hard pressed to call it sin. If I were a legalist, like the middle bit, I'd call it sin. If I'm a romanticist, I'd call it love what he did. Shemaine, did I answer the two questions at least superficially?
Oui.
Tell me if I've got a couple of minutes or not.
2 minutes.
Okay, so I just want to add to what we've said. Any reason. Now, in legal terms, mostly in the West, The West technically means USA and Europe. The world recognizes this, and there are two terms for this type of separation: no fault, divorce, and make sure I get my spelling correct. Irreconcilable differences. So two types of divorce: no fault divorce and irreconcilable divorce. So you may have heard both terms. I'm saying from a legal perspective, they're almost the same thing. The purpose of them is to end a marriage, and you don't have to prove someone did anything wrong, which means you can divorce for any reason. So what I've suggested, there's a legal framework for that already in place. Now, I want to add something. This is a problem that Christianity is in, especially Adventism. Progressive pastors or administrations in the Adventist church will allow you to, I'll say the word divorce, but we'll call it separate. They'll allow you to separate and even get the legal paperwork, which is divorce. So once you've divorced, we're not talking about adultery for any reason other than adultery. They'll let you divorce, but then they'll tell you you can't remarry. So I did speak to people about this. I don't know if anybody knows anyone who's been divorced. And if you do know them, if you've looked at the paperwork, the divorce paper. In England, UK, the paperwork says something like this. This person that you used to be married to, and now you're divorced, legally, they are dead to you. And both people get the same document. So it says, she is dead. And then to her paperwork, it says, he is dead. So both people are now dead. Which means the world acknowledges the biblical principle for remarriage based upon death. So they say you're still alive in real life, but in the legal framework, you're now dead. And the dead know nothing. The dead have no part in this world. So you can't take anything from a dead person. That's why it's done that way. So all these Adventists, they've got the paperwork that says my ex-partner is dead, and the church says we don't care. In God's eyes, they're still alive. In the world's eyes, they're dead. I'm saying this two tier or two definitions of marriage is wrong. It's something that conservative Christians have invented and won't stand up to law. God's law, I'm saying. I don't think it does. And so what I'm suggesting is, when you divorce and you have a paperwork, you're allowed to remarry because it's legal. And if you doubt that, you go to Matthew 5:31, and it says in number 2, you get your writing of divorcement, your divorce paper, the woman needs that for one reason, which is what? That she can remarry afterwards. If you divorce your wife and don't give her the paper, she can't remarry. And that's the crime that's been identified, which is separate to the crime of just getting rid of your wife for no reason, which is no fault divorce. Jesus says if you're going to do that, do her a favor and give her some paperwork so she can move on. That document today, because of we have people who think we're in companionship marriage but behave like we're in protection marriage. Are in this confusing world of having two types of marriage in their mind. And if you just live in one, everything becomes simple. If you're divorced, you're really divorced. And you can remarry according to God's law and the world's law. The two kingdoms, they operate in identical fashions. I've run out of time. I know we still have many questions. Maybe we'll pick them up in the future sometime. I hope we've moved a little bit closer to coming onto common ground. You and me, and also between yourselves. And most importantly, if you're already married, that your relationship can be improved as you start to review what marriage really is about. Let's pray. Holy God, we thank you. I thank you for your goodness and mercy. When I review my life, the things that I've done, the things that I've said, the things that I've taught, I thank you that despite all of those mistakes, you never abandoned me. You never abandoned any of us who are kneeling before you. You have always been faithful to us. You agreed to take full responsibility because you saw our weakness. And I thank you for that. May all of us be thankful for the opportunity that we can grow and learn, that we can change our minds and view things in a different way. It's our collective prayer, our single prayer as a movement, that you would show us the truth of what marriage is meant to be today, because it's our responsibility to put marriage in its proper place, to give this institution its proper place in our lives. We might do that in our personal lives. We might set a good example. But what you're asking of us, what we need to ask of ourselves, is about law. I thank you for that. In Jesus' name. Amen.